We already pointed out the fact that they have a protection racket in place, a law that actually prevents private company, FedEx or UPS or some company that you might start, from competing with the Postal Service for what's called first-class mail.
Free Talk Live.
Let's talk to Vernon in New Orleans. Vernon, you're on Free Talk Live with Ian Johnson and Laurel.
I'll try to be a neutral party, and I'm really all about the facts. So in your previous segment, you were mentioning that the post office is sort of supported by federal funding.
Yes.
And I just wanted to clarify that from what I've read and what I understand, and I have no ties to the post office, and I agree with you that as far as it being necessary for today's using email and everything, it's not necessary minus packages, but it's required to be funded. They have to fund their pension plans at least 10 years in advance, which really takes away from their ability to be profitable. If you actually look at the numbers, and if they weren't required to pre-fund their pension plan so far in advance, the post office is actually supposedly profitable. But and also I wanted to clarify that according, again, to what I've read, they don't receive a dime from the federal government. But yes, they do have to run all their stuff through the federal government, the Congress, just like any other federal entity does. But as far as being funded, like from a general fund or whatever, from what I understand, that's not true.
Yeah, no, I wasn't saying they're funded from the general fund. What I was saying was they are using federal money to shore up their pension funds because they don't have enough money to do it.
I don't think they're doing that. I think they've only used the profits, like from selling stamps and from selling other things, to pay all of that. They just have to pay so much of the profit up front to shore up that pension plan, which is really not shoring it up. It's simply making sure that it's funded at least 10 years in advance, which no other federal agency is required to do that. And so by them being required to do that, it always makes them look as though they're unprofitable, which I find interesting that the U.S. Congress would have enacted some sort of a law that requires the post office to pre-fund their pension plan so far in advance to kind of give it that look as though it's not profitable. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Well, the reality is, okay, let's take what you're saying and presume that it's true, that if it weren't for these mandates put on them by the government, that they would be profitable. The reality is mail volume, as far as actual first-class mail, has been going down year after year. So they've got a huge problem that's only going to continue getting worse over time.
But the package delivery business is skyrocketed, and I don't know if you've ever seen one of those little post office vans going around on a Sunday.
Yep.
I mean, I have never seen that until Amazon actually contracted with them to start doing, the final mile delivery.
Yep.
And I mean, I've even read articles where these postal employees are complaining that they have to work on a Sunday because, and the post office is making them because they're so worried about profitability. Because just like TVA, they don't get any sort of government funding, and if they don't get those profits, then they're not. From what I understand, I don't think they've ever gotten a bailout from the federal government. And so if they lose profitability, then of course they're going to have to cut employees and everything. I don't know if that's ever happened or not, but I really do think that even though letter volume is down, that because I don't know about you all, but I rely on the post office for the last mile delivery of most of my packages.
Well, can you imagine what would happen if they removed the laws that prohibited other shipping services from delivering to residential and business mailboxes?
What other laws? UPS and FedEx can deliver just as the same as USPS.
They cannot deliver to your mailbox. They cannot.
But they just go right up to your house. It's not a big deal.
Mailbox?
On your front door.
What do you mean by your mailbox?
Like a mailbox. Like if you have a mailbox, they can't touch it.
But mostly you can't put packages in there anyway. They're too small.
Depends on the
most
package.
part. Yeah, but you're right. You can't put anything in there.
Notification for a package.
It's a federal crime, is what you're saying, to put something that's not mail from the Postal Service in a mailbox.
Right.
Yeah, but then you just deliver directly to the house. I don't think it's an issue.
It's a huge issue.
Why is it?
And that's why they're
issue?
coming up with services like Amazon Key and all that stuff. Because in cities, especially in urban areas, there is no front door place to put it without that package possibly or even probably getting stolen.
I read an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal just a couple of days ago that the post office is actually looking at allowing other companies to pay a fee to be able to put whatever they'd like in that mailbox.
Wow, how magnanimous of them.
I know, right? Go to Google News and look it up. It's very interesting. But in general, I mean, I know you all, the theme of the show a lot of the time is all government is evil, all government is bad.
No, it's just force and violence.
It's because it's backed by violence. If it weren't backed by violence, if it weren't backed by aggression, then it wouldn't be a problem. And if you want to cut the
post office... The post office is not backed by violence. I agree with him.
Well, I don't know, man.
Dude, it's a law. Look up the PES laws. Just look up for Wikipedia PES laws. Any law is a threat at the barrel of a gun that if you do not comply, people who are armed will come and tell you what to do.
Right.
If you don't abide by what they tell you to do, they shoot you or they lock you in a cage. And if you refuse to be locked in the cage, they shoot you.
Even though they may not be mostly funded by violence, if what you're saying is true, Vernon, that they're not actually getting payments from the taxpayers for their pensions, which is maybe I swear I'd heard they were in the past, but maybe they're not anymore. I don't know. But even if that's true, there's still these laws that essentially enshrine the Postal Service as the monopoly dealer of certain delivery services. So again,
Absolutely.
It's illegal for you to create a competitor to the Postal Service. So therefore, they have a monopoly. It's not a disagreement. It's illegal for you to deliver mail that's under $1 in value.
No, I could go to. I don't know about that. I can't comment on that.
Well, you can research now.
I'm telling you, it's illegal. That's why they went after Lysander Spooner in the 1800s for that.
Why aren't there more services saying you can send a letter for $1?
Well, because why would you even want to bother with that?
Well, why do people use
monopoly?
FedEx Ground?
Huh?
And they pay. Why do people use FedEx Ground to send mail? And it's like $15. Like, why does FedEx Ground exist? It takes 3 days.
FedEx Ground? You mean for packages?
To send a letter.
Very few people use FedEx to send a letter unless they need something delivered quickly, typically.
Well, then why does it exist?
Overnight, for instance.
Why would they even have it, which they do?
Why do they have a ground service?
FedEx, when
it's
you're
for
sending
packages,
a letter.
Mostly.
Right, but UPS and FedEx, you can send something and not overnight it. It'll take a couple of days.
That's true. Generally, that's a package service. Most people who are sending letters, if they need to get it somewhere soon, they're going to do it overnight, okay, or the next day or something like that.
Also, FedEx and UPS will act as couriers. So, like, for example, if you're delivering it to an office, FedEx and UPS will walk into that office, go up to a desk and hand it to someone and potentially get it signed for, whereas the post office just throws it in a box.
It's also insured as well. If you want it to be insured with UPS and FedEx, you don't insure first-class mail, for instance. That's just not an option. So it's a much more higher level. Like if you're gonna have legal papers signed, you don't want to just put that in an envelope and throw it in first-class mail.
No, I send it via priority mail. Which has a tracking information, and it costs about $7, and it's insured automatically for $50.
Now they finally have that after years of the UPS and FedEx having trackable insured mail. Priority Mail finally got it after like another 15 years later.
Now, I will say that if I absolutely have to get something in overnight, like if I have an appeal that has a very hard deadline, I have to FedEx it because USPS isn't reliable enough.
If you walk into USPS, they hire FedEx to do that work, from what I understand.
It's true.
Yeah.
Just a final thought. One of the other innovations that I think the post office is starting to come into the 21st century. I have this email that comes to me on a daily basis that shows me scanned images of everything that I'm expecting in the mail.
Creepy.
It's very nice, and it also is able to sync up to all my packages. I know this is like 1990s technology, but I think they're doing their absolute best in the confines of the regulation.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. They are doing their absolute best in the confines, and that means they're losing $3.9 billion. Thank you for the call tonight. In the last fiscal year, according to CNN Politics.
I wonder what Edward Snowden would say about that metadata the government is being handed by scanning every single letter.
Yep. More on the way here. Toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. One benefit of the Postal Service is that they do ostensibly need a warrant to open your mail, unlike UPS and FedEx.
Not to scan the outside.
That's true. There's no doubt that the Postal Service is one of the least offensive government agencies because it is as disconnected from the government's funding sources as it can possibly be compared to most government agencies. Although that said, it's not entirely disconnected. And Johnson, you've got a story that you found you wanted to share. For those of you just tuning in, this is what we've been talking about. Ian Johnson and Laurel in the studio tonight. Phones are open for you if you want to join us here. And then if we get the chance, we'll talk about pointless jobs, because there is a point to the Postal Service. People are going to, in the absence of government monopoly, people are still going to want to send things through the mail, whatever that would look like in some sort of market-based system where we actually have true competition in these areas. We already pointed out the fact that they have a protection racket in place, a law that actually prevents private company, FedEx or UPS or some company that you might start, from competing with the Postal Service for what's called first-class mail, basically. Anything that's under $1 is considered that. And, of course, you brought up a good point, Johnson, and that is that once the price of a stamp goes over $1, what's going to happen? Are they going to adjust the law to make it so first class is anything under $2 to keep the protection racket going? Or what? But that's not all. There's several, $18 billion per year worth of subsidies in various different ways they receive?
So, yeah, let me go into this article's a little old, but I think it covers some interesting
It's just a few years old. It's still true.
Yep. So it says here, the United States Postal Service's financial troubles have been well publicized in recent years. The worst of it came in 2012 when the USPS lost a whopping $15.9 billion, followed by $4.8 billion and then $5.3 billion in 2013 and 2014, respectively.
How do you do that without being subsidized?
Yeah.
But that's one of the things I want to know is, like, if you're running a business and you're losing billions of dollars every single year, your venture capitalists are going to dry up, right? Like, they're going to be like, yeah, you need to change how you're doing your business or we're not going to keep giving you money. But these guys just keep year after year. It's $15 billion here.
3.9 they lost in 2018, right? And 2.7 in 2017.
Right, according to CNN Politics, fiscal year 2018, they lost $3.9 billion. So it's just like, that's not a business. Okay? By no means, in any way, shape, or form, is that a business.
Well, post office officials have often attributed the losses to the decline in demand for first-class mail in favor of more efficient modes of communication,
like email.
Yeah. And congressional mandates that the USPS do things like deliver mail on Saturdays and to unprofitable parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the USPS claims that if it weren't for such requirements, it would more or less break even if we only didn't have to deliver the mail, so like any other business would. So it says Robert Shapiro, former Treasury Undersecretary and chairman of the economic consultancy Sonicon, points out in a new analysis, American taxpayers subsidize the USPS at a rate that surpasses the costs associated with any congressional mandate. He estimates that all told, the subsidies and legal monopolies that Congress bestows upon the post office is worth around $18 billion annually. This was in 2015. These include laws that bar any other shipping service from delivering mail and packages that directly to residential and business mailboxes. This is what I mentioned a little bit ago. Shapiro estimates that this gives the post office a $14 billion annual boost, more than 3 times what Postal Regulatory Commission estimates it to be. Shapiro argues that the PRC's analysis doesn't take into account the productivity gains that the post office would be forced to make if it really had to compete for mailbox delivery. He points out that the productivity at USPS has only grown by 0.7% per year versus 2.5% for its competition. Tax breaks. The post office
is a biggie.
Yeah, huge. Yeah. The post office is exempt from state and local property and real estate taxes. Huge.
Which is huge. Tremendous cost, especially here in New Hampshire, where that is essentially how the state's funded, is through the property tax.
Oh, but let's not forget other burdens like tolls, vehicle registration fees, parking tickets. Those exemptions save the USPS $2.18 billion a year. So, I mean, imagine if, FedEx and, UPS had those.
Right. UPS drivers are paying tickets all the time.
Yeah.
It's just part of, like in New York City, they're constantly breaking traffic laws because there's nowhere to park or whatever. Right. So they're just leaving the truck running while they go in, and they're just occupying a lane of traffic or whatever it is they got to do, and then they come out
fuel for that entire time.
Burning fuel, and then also they get tickets all the time. It's just like, cost of doing business. It's just the way we got to do it because we can't drive around and find a parking spot.
Even more tickets in places that are making laws that you can't idle a vehicle.
Right.
So, this one's one probably people don't think of. Cheap borrowing. The United States Postal Service, writes Shapiro, can borrow from the U.S. Treasury through the Federal Financing Bank.
That explains
highly
it.
Subsidized interest rates.
Yeah, so that explains it, because I'm thinking to myself here, when the guy called in and was saying, the Postal Service isn't taxpayer funded, meaning that not only are they not funding their operations, but they're also not funding their or not shoring up their retirement scheme, which is what I thought was going on. So I'm like, how
where's the money coming from?
Yeah, I mean, you can't just keep losing billions of dollars a year because you don't have that sitting in the bank. You're losing it. I mean, they don't have $100 million or $100 billion just sitting in the bank to just keep funding these losses. So what you're saying is they're getting loans from, was it the Federal Reserve?
Yeah. Federal Financing Bank.
Okay, it's probably some sort of...
How they can go on to say, how anyone can say that they're not using federal dollars is
it's clearly.
That they're only operating on... their profits.
So they're taking loans.
No.
So
if they're losing money, then all the money that they're taking in loan is at the cost to the taxpayer.
Right. So every year they keep taking it, just keep adding it up, right? Because they're not paying it off. There hasn't been a year in the last 20 years or whatever.
Somewhere in the vicinity of like $45 billion.
The total amount of losses?
It's probably
And if they're still operating at a loss every year, basically they're never going to pay the money back.
They'll never pay the loan back, which means that whenever it is this all comes to a head, whenever that is, because again, there's no restrictions probably on how much of these loans they can pull. Really?
It currently borrows the legal limit of $15.2 billion at a rate of 1.2%. Without this access, it would be paying somewhere between $415 million and $419 million per year more in interest.
If it didn't have the special deal, is what you're saying.
They were getting a commercial loan.
Yeah.
Finally, and who the hell would give them a loan?
Yeah.
This is a guarantee, right? Like they can just keep going back to the trough.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wish I could do that.
Like, why would any banker, give these people a loan? I mean, you're looking at their business numbers here. You're looking over the last 20 years, and you're like, okay, your revenue keeps dropping. Yeah, your packages are up, but you continue to drop as far as how much business you're doing overall, and you're losing money hand over fist. You're not going to get bailed out, presumably. So why would we take a risk? Why would we take a risk giving you haven't made a simple loan payment? This story here from CNN Politics says they just didn't pay the $6.9 billion in benefits prepayments in the last year. So they're supposed to be paying into
benefits,
the benefit fund.
There's another thing there that finally Shapiro points out, that the USPS pays its workers' salaries and benefits far above rates paid to similar workers in the private sector. Labor accounted for 78% of the organization's costs in 2014, with about 89% of those costs involving employees represented by collective bargaining.
Unions.
These higher labor costs, plus the absence of a need to innovate due to government-granted monopolies, has freed the UPS from $20 billion in labor and productivity costs per year, Shapiro estimates. While we do not technically count this as a subsidy, he writes, it represents an economic burden on others arising directly from USPS's monopoly position. Postage, for instance, would likely be a lot cheaper for everyone if the organization were subject to the same competitive pressures as private firms.
Postal workers make very good salaries. They make $40,000 to $85,000 a year.
Sweet.
It's crazy, yeah.
Toll-free number tonight, 855-450-FREE. According to the Postal Service's own statement, they were, quote, unable to make the $6.9 billion in payments that were due to the federal government at the end of fiscal year 2018 to pre-fund pension and health benefits for postal retirees without putting its ability to fulfill its primary mission at undue risk. They just didn't make the payments. So what's going to happen? Someone's going to pay for it.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.